Hello you fabulous lot, it's Gran here with another episode of Vintage Story from the Rusty Gear server. Now then, in the last episode you saw me build the gate and I was really pleased with it. We're moving on from that today and I'm going to show you how much progress I made between May and September. If you have a look at the date, we're in spring, it's March, so we've gone through into another year. But I have done a lot. I've also made some big decisions about the build as well because some things weren't working out too well. Other things have worked out very well. So I should be explaining that and showing you what I got up to. And in sort of the second half of the video, I'm going to be showing you the whole layout of the castle. Yep, the whole plan is revealed. So I do have quite a lot to show. So without further ado, let's get on with it. Well, I wish I could say I've done a little bit of quarrying and a little bit of digging of dirt. But in truth, I've done an awful lot of quarrying and an awful lot of digging for dirt. I've been flying around quite a lot with my angel belt as well, because once you get into using it, it's really hard to turn it off and think I'll walk there. Not when you get there at double speed. So from where we left off last episode, I was starting to extend the walls on each side of the castle. Now the books describe the walls as grey granite. In fact, the whole build is of grey granite. It's very grey. But we've got a lot of scope in Vintage Story to make plain grey granite a little bit more interesting. So I've started off with cobblestone, which I quite like really. It's got a lot of character to it, I think. So I'm trying to make the front side of the castle symmetrical. Well, both walls all the walls actually are going to be the same height all around the castle. There are supposed to be two walls separated by a moat. We'll talk about the moat a little bit later. I fancied a border at the bottom of the direwolf, so I chose some polished granite slabs. I quite like the look of that. And then I thought, it needs a bit of balance. It would need something at the top. I wasn't quite sure whether to put the same thing on or something different. So I had to go at a few blocks. First were the slabs. But I didn't quite like the look of those. I thought I'd try something fancy on them. And of course the other blocks were the top part of a block instead of the bottom. But even so, I didn't feel that that was the right thing to put on. So I soon got rid of that. I tried some polished slabs at the top as well. But they didn't quite look the part. They really didn't. They stuck out too much. So I thought maybe shaving them down a little bit might do the trick. So I lopped some off, but then it got rid of the borders. And I quite liked the borders on it. I did have one or two accidents with my angel belt. You have to remember, if you're up high, not to turn it off. But it wasn't too bad. I haven't died yet, cross fingers. But I did want to see what they looked like if I got them down right to the size of probably a tile, like a 1 voxel tile. Could hardly see it though once I'd done that, and I think it was because of the borders. I persisted for a little bit though and made it all the same along the top. But once I looked at it, I don't know, I just liked the borders in it. But I didn't want the tiles sticking out like the bottom. That felt like a proper bottom part. The top bit I wanted to be more flat, but I wanted to be able to see the borders. So my next thought was to insert a slab into the granite and then just have the bordered surface showing. So that's what I did next. So I inserted my slab, made sure that I'd identified that as the block that I wanted to use, And then I used the quarter size chisel and popped that in. And that's the sort of thing I wanted. It's quite flat, there's no shadow underneath, but you can see the borders. I quite like that. So all these had to go, and I chiselled those in. I could have used the pantograph to insert materials as well, but I had thought about it at this point, and there was only a little bit to do, so I just got on with it and did it. And that was what I wanted. Yep. I was getting quite a few bears. I left them in the trap hoping that they wouldn't spawn anymore. The wolves though, they were multiplying. Now I don't know if this happens to you, but when I'm looking at stuff I see other stuff as well, so I often get very, very distracted. But I eventually get back to what I was doing in the first place. Eventually. Anyway, this little pond had caught my eye and I wanted to keep that. But I felt that this big oak tree was in the way, so I decided to get rid of it. Didn't take long, really. Not with my steel axe. And there was a little maple by it as well, and I got rid of that as well. And it just opened the pond so you could see it from the village. I quite like that. I decided to do something with these large towers on either side of the gate next. And it needed a roof, so I had to decide what to do with the roof. I used aged wood for the floors. I quite like aged wood, and for this build it's absolutely essential because it's an ancient build, is Winterfell. It's the ancestral home of House Stark, and it was built thousands of years ago, so it has to look old. I did keep an eye on my livestock, and I kept checking on my chickens because you know what happened before. Well, it seemed to have happened again. I didn't notice straight away. I was filling up the seed boxes and then I looked at one of the chickens and it was dead. Not all of them were dead though, some of them were sleeping. And when I looked a little bit more closely, looks partially charred, perhaps due to a lightning strike. So that's what it was. Well, I had to get rid of all the dead stuff. Oh, even the chicks didn't escape. You wouldn't have thought lightning could have been so specific. At least I'd found them when I still had some chickens left this time. There was quite a few of them as well, but it was obvious I needed to make a lightning rod. I couldn't remember making a lightning rod before. I thought this might be interesting. A lightning rod. 3 copper rods. Copper rods. 1. No, surely I could get 2 out of an ingot, couldn't I? Actually, no, I could not. So I hadn't made enough. I needed another ingot. Because I'd only made 2. Oh dear. So I made another one, got my 3 rods and made my lightning rod. It needed to be placed 40 blocks above ground for maximum effect. And I was hoping that fences would do for that. So off I went to find somewhere to put it. Now, I wanted it to cover all my animals, so I thought I'd put it in the middle-ish, and that would be on the side of the Arrock bulls. I had a little bit of space there, thought it'd just do there. And it said up to 40 blocks, so I suspected that as long as it was above all the buildings, it would do. So I just made sure it was above, and then plonked my lightning rod on top, and now I felt fairly confident that my livestock would stay alive until I came at them with a chopper, of course. So back to the gate towers. Well, for the roof I thought I'd stick with cobblestone, but I just wanted a little bit of variety, so I added some aged polished granite. Just a little subtle change on the top. I quite like that. Yep, that would do. Now there was a lot of space in these towers, and towers in castles were often used for multiple purposes really. Storage was an important use of towers. Sometimes they were used for living quarters as well. And they were also used for signalling, apparently. I googled it, you see. So they were quite important, and getting a few floors out of each tower would serve a few of those purposes. I also had to think about how the structures inside this tower were going to be supported. Now the obvious choice would be wood, and we have quite a few different wood types that we could be using. So we've got the support beams, we've got the planks, we've got logs. So I think probably a combination of all those are going to be used in these towers to make it look robust and old as well. But for now, I needed to concentrate on getting the stairs to the different access point levels. There would be access to the battlements and access to the different towers. So that meant a bit of careful planning, which I'm not good at all. Aged logs looked the part for the big heavy supports. I eventually added 2 more floors to the inside of each tower. So including the ground floor, that made 3 floors. There's quite a lot of room, was that? I made those aged logs go all the way through all the floors right up to the ceiling. And made sure it was well lit on each of the floors. Because I have had 1 or 2 critters spawning in dark spots because I've been taking my night watches for quarrying. Once I'd made one tower secure, I was straight over to the other one to put the floors and the roof in that one as well. All the bits and pieces were exactly the same, but I just mirrored them. Just needed the roof on now. I was soon back to doing more work on the crenellations. That's all these bits and bats at the top here. You know, the arrow slits and the murder holes. It wasn't too bad because I'd already done some and I had my angel belt, so I was flitting backwards and forwards like nobody's business. I did have to take care though that I pantographed the right bit onto the right bit, so some careful counting had to be done. Thank goodness for my angel belt, that's all I could say. I couldn't imagine doing this without one. There would be a lot more to-ing and fro-ing, and a lot of support blocks would be needed. I am thinking of putting some corbels underneath these murder holes under here. Corbels, if you remember, support the murder holes on either side, so they're a little bit sort of arched. But I want to see if I can do it on the diagonal parts of the walls first before I actually put them on these, because I think if I can't put them on the diagonal walls, I won't put them on these bits. I have been wondering about these corner blocks as well, whether to leave them like that or to try and make them a little bit straighter by doing some chiselling. I was quite careful as well to try and finish everything off in each little bit. I mean, not all at once, but as I went along. Because I think detail makes all the difference in a build. And I think a build can look pretty untidy quite quickly if you don't finish off all the bits that you need to. And some bits like this, you can't just whip the pantograph out and copy and paste. You've just got to get your chisel out and chisel those little bits to finish things off. I must admit I do dot about a bit with a very big build because I don't want to get too bogged down in one area at a time. I like to do a bit of this, and when I get fed up of it, I like to do a bit of that and come back to the first bit. So that's probably what I'm going to be like on this build. So when I got a bit fed up of putting stairs in and floors in, I went outside to do some more work on the crenellations. And when I'd had enough of that, I came back in to do some more woodwork. There was still an awful lot to do with the towers. There needed to be support beams, I mentioned earlier. There needs to be railings for safety. And of course then there would be needed to be decorated. And I'd probably pop back between the big build and the cottages and the towers and other bits and bats, just to mix everything up a little bit. That way I find I don't get tired of a build. There's always something new to look forward to, always something different to do. I find mixing it up keeps it fresh. There's also the inspiration that comes to you as well when you're doing different aspects of a build. And another thing is not being afraid to fail. I'm not afraid to fail. I'll try stuff. If I don't like it, it'll come down and I'll try something else. It takes time, it does, but you do find out what you like and what you don't like. I'd been trying different blocks for the walkways that joined the towers and that would go around the walls. And I settled on a combination of cobblestone and the aged polished rock. All in granite, of course. And just to mention that everything I do on this build is very much a progression, it's a process, because I'm learning as I go along. I've never built a castle before, and there are a lot of aspects to it. So as I find more and more out, things will definitely change. These were a prime example. Arrow slits in walls weren't just any holes in walls, you know. They were quite specifically designed, and the sides of them were diagonal, so that the archers could get close into the arrow slits to aim their arrows, or the crossbowmen could aim their bolts. So of course I had to do the same once I found that out. They needed to go down further though. And that was the perfect arrow slit. I'd also widened it as well, so it was a little bit bigger. Once I'd got the floors in, I made access to the roof part as well. That was quite an important part of the defence. I copied across the ladder design that I did for some of the cottages. If you remember, some of them had upstairs, so I made ladders. And I used the ladder maker to enable me to go up and down them, because of course just chiselling ladders don't work. And then on the top I placed a trapdoor, and I wish there was a more aged looking trapdoor as well. It doesn't quite look the same as the other aged wood that I've been using. So I want to move on from the towers now. I've done as much as I want to do in them for the moment. I've obviously got to come back and decorate them, but I think they're doing okay. Got to dirty up the walls and fill the towers with, well, all sorts of things that we can fill them with. We've got this floor, we've got some fencing in for safety. Up here, we've got this floor that leads out to the battlements. And as for the walls, well, we've only just started the walls and lots of arrow slits to make and do. And the only thing that interrupts my work are temporal storms and doing some homesteading. So you can get from one tower to the other. And this one is just a mirror image of the other tower. So you can go all the way down to the bottom of here as well. I am going to actually fit doors up there, so... yeah, so lots and lots of space. And then if you come out this door, you're back where the front gate is. There we go. I think that worked out really, really well. I'm hoping I can get that direwolf onto some banners, but I'm not quite sure. I think they'd have to be quite big banners. Maybe even an outline of it. Now I'm waiting to get rid of this temporal storm. I'll need a little bit of a nibble. And I was just thinking, I hadn't shown you that I'd done a little bit more work upstairs in the inn. So I'll just finish nibbling off this apple and I'll show you what I've done. So I've added a little bit of depth by pushing the walls back with my planer. And I think that makes it look so much better. I've added a cupboard here. Can't remember if that was there when I last showed you up here. It's a bit of an awkward cupboard, but I think I'd make something out of it. And I don't know if Sid's mentioned this, what I call a cupboard, but he's called it something else. Let's not go there. But all the bedrooms have a window in now, and you can see out over different aspects of the build. Those two, obviously, out over the square, and these two over the village. So you can have a good nosy at what people are doing, if you've nothing else to do. This one's got 2 windows in it. Oh, it's got 2 lamps in it as well. I don't know why it needs 2. I think I'll get one of those. There we go. Only needs 1 in. That won't be the only lighting. I just haven't got to thinking about what else to put in there. That only had 1, and that had 1. I think that was the only one I'd put 2 in. But yeah, I'm quite liking the way this looks. And there's space here to have a table so people can chat. Let's not look at that corner. I'm not quite sure what to do with it. Another change I made with the walls, I made them a little bit wider. And I also made a 2 wide block space inside them, because you're supposed to be able to get all the way around Winterfell, the whole castle, through the walls without any interruption. So I'm making sure that that's going to happen. And I think those walls look a little bit more robust. Another tedious job that I have to do is to fill in all these ponds. There are quite a few on this site, which means digging up a load of dirt. I have tried to make my digging up dirt areas sort of environmentally friendly. Well, in terms of the aesthetics. I've tried to make them look as natural as possible. Well, I soon found that dirt didn't go very far at all, and I soon learned that I needed to collect an awful lot each time I went out to collect dirt. But my next thought was on a drawbridge and a moat. So thinking of those things, and going back around to the square, I found that somebody had left me a little present. It was a statue of a king. Well, I'm assuming it was a king because it looks like he's got a crown on. And it was a statue that Sid had found in a ruin. And I thought it was glorious. I really did. I wasn't quite sure what those blocks were he was standing on. It said they were trimmed with gold, so I don't know where you'd get that from. And then I discovered the sign at the back. So the statue was by QP, and it got me some aged firewood and some support beams. That was awesome. And I'd have to have a good think on where to use that statue. So I'd made a drawbridge, but it was a bit tricky to place, to be honest. I had to have a few goes. It took me a while to suss it out, how to open it, which way it would open, how to place it, and what you could have next to it to be able to place it. Yeah, it was tricky. But I got the hang of it, and I placed it. And it was super cool watching it come down. I couldn't wait to get my moat in. I was planning on having a proper water moat with a drawbridge. Because Winterfell had 2 walls. It had an outer wall, of 80 foot and an inner wall of 100 foot. But I wanted to have a go at placing water and whether it would work properly in a moat and whether I could fill a whole moat with water without leaving all those irritating particles. I think I was doing it. Who invented flies? Oh my goodness me. I'd already placed a layer of dirt and I was laying the water on top and being careful to fill every block space, every square with a bucket of water. And it seemed to be working okay. And I got the first area done. So I dug another hole. I laid more dirt. And I filled in all the squares. And then I got rid of the dirt and all the water went down without leaving any particles. I just wanted to move this bit in the middle. Now I put this bit in the middle because I was just experimenting. But something was funny. Something was odd. And it just wouldn't let me fill in the space once I'd taken out the blocks without the particles. It was so frustrating. I placed my buckets everywhere, on top, on the sides, one block out. It just would not get rid of the particles. So thinking about it, that would mean I would have to have dug the whole moat and filled in the water in one fell swoop all the way around the castle. I did take everything out and tried the whole thing again, and it was still the same. I got to the same point of removing that bit in the middle and I got loads of particles and I just couldn't get rid of them. I did ask advice as well. I asked Sid if he could help me with it, and he came and had a look at it. But he didn't have any secret way of managing the water. I had spent quite a long time on this, and I was getting to the point where I was thinking, well, maybe we won't add any water. Maybe we won't have water. Maybe we'd have a dry moat, because there are a lot of castles without water in their moats. It's just sort of a big pit. I was sad about it though, because I had thought I could do the water. I thought a lot about it and decided to get on with the inner wall to see how that would look and how big it needed to be. I mean, the outer wall was supposed to be 80 foot, the inner wall 100 foot. Would it be feasible for me to do an inner wall at all? And I was thinking at this point, maybe I should get rid of the moat, the bridge and the inner wall and just focus on the castle. I mean, a lot of images of Winterfell do not have a moat and an inner wall, and they were still accepted as images of Winterfell. So I concentrated on the wall whilst I deliberated over what I should do. I did make a decision on the statue though. I thought I'd make a granite copy of it and put it on the other side of the gate. And I wasn't quite sure whether I wanted two statues that were exactly the same except for the colouring. I'd have to think about it. But they were super cool and I quite liked them where they were. Well, once I'd got the inner wall to the height that I thought it should be, I decided it was all far too much for me to do this season. Absolutely too much. What was I thinking of? The statues look good now they were both in granite though. But it was now time to do some planning. I needed to move on. I needed to get the rest of the build planned out. So I started off thinking about the towers that were going to be intermittently placed around the wall, every 24 blocks or so. In the real Winterfell, there were over 30 towers, on the inner wall and watchtowers on the outer wall. But I couldn't have both, obviously, because I was only doing one wall now. But I felt that these should be round. Round towers were quite a big feature in Winterfell, as you'll soon find out. And these diagonal walls were going to be tricky, but I still wanted to maintain the space inside them. And once they were chiselled, I'm sure the space would be good enough. Inside each tower, I wanted to have space for a central pillar around which I would build the staircase. And obviously, it would be a spiral staircase, but nothing like the spiral staircases that I've built so far. And I've done a couple of them. I still didn't have a clear picture of any of the roofs I was going to be using, or even the material that I was going to make them out of. But I'm sure it would come to me, given time. Next to this wall is where I'm going to build the smithy. Now the shape and the size of it could change over time. I'm just sort of estimating where I think the boundaries would go. It took a little bit of jiggery-pokery to get something I was satisfied with. And even then I thought it was a bit on the small side. I really did need to get rid of these ponds. But every so often I would put in another tower. And I took the measurements of this first wall to guide me on how far down the wall I should do another tower. And the magic number was 24. So every 24 blocks down a wall I would place a circular tower. And they would all be the same. And when I stood back and had a look, I thought that the space between towers would be okay. It looked quite feasible to me. On the other side of the gate, against that wall, is where I planned to build the armory. I couldn't find much description of the armory, but it was accessed by a covered bridge which was attached to the Great Keep. I'll be talking about the Great Keep in a bit, but as Winterfell was a major holdfast into the north, its armory would be well equipped with lots of weapons and armour, so it needed to be a fair size. Well, I couldn't hold up any longer. I needed the space, so all the ponds would have to go. So I needed to make a concerted effort to get rid of these ponds and fill them in with dirt. So the process began, and it took a fair while. I also needed to get rid of the little ruins I had all about the place as well. But once that was done, I wanted to start work on the Great Hall. This would be the biggest building in the castle. There was a small amount of description about the Great. It was used for receiving guests and having meetings. The household dined together here, and it describes the long rows of trestle tables, 4 to each side of the central aisle, that could seat 500 people. So it was quite a substantial size, was this great, and it joined up with the Great Keep. The Great Hall took quite some time to plan out. There was a lot of things to think about. I had been looking around for images of the Great Hall. There weren't many, and the images that were very different from each other, but there was one that I am drawing inspiration from. The description in the books mentioned the grey stone walls, wide doors made of oak and iron which opened to the castle yard, a rear exit to a dimly lit galley, and a raised platform for noble guests, and the walls were covered in banners. So there was a lot to fit in, there was a lot of work to do in the Great Hall. Not only did I need lots of dirt to fill in all the ponds, but I also needed lots of dirt to make packed dirt as well, because that's the only thing that doesn't grow grass. And I needed to be able to see the outline of the castle plans. So, yeah, I did a lot of digging. But it was coming on, and I'd finished what I thought was an outline for the Great Hall. I had planned archers. A lot of archers. Now, as I've mentioned, adjoining the Great Hall is the Great Keep. And in the books, this is described as the innermost castle and stronghold. This was built over hot springs, and the water from the hot springs were used to warm the bedchambers, so the family was kept warm during the long winters. In the Great Hall, beyond the trestle tables and the nobles area, I planned to make a big fireplace with more archers and access to the upper floors. So I had an image in my mind for the Great Hall that I was going to work towards. And it certainly would be the biggest building within the castle. The next building I really needed to think about was the Great Keep, which I've already mentioned. And this was a large circular building. In many of the images I've seen of Winterfell, the Great Keep looks to be raised out of the roof of the Great Hall. Next, I wanted to make sure I got in some guest quarters. And so I wrapped these around the living quarters of the Starks. I thought that would be a sensible place to put it. And that seemed to work out well. That was quite a large complex, or it was going to be. I carried on with the walls. The one on the northern side came quite close to the lake. In fact, I felt that I might have to add a little bit more land there because one of the round towers was actually in the lake, and we couldn't have that. But on that northern side, I had 2 lots of diagonal walls. I was just hoping that diagonal walls worked out okay. But I thought probably the rest of the walls would be straight ones. And once I got back onto the straight walls, that's where I decided to build the guards hall next to the straight wall on the northern side. So it wasn't far from the armory, and it was quite close to the Great Keep. There was a cave that hadn't been down just a little bit further on from the guards hall, and seeing as I had my angel belt on, I thought I'd dip in and have a quick look to see if there was anything interesting down there. Even though I had my angel belt on, I didn't go without my shield, and I thought a quick look above me would be the sensible thing to do before I actually went down. But that seemed to be a bit of a dead end, so down I went. And I didn't have to go much further before I saw that aged wood. And I found a translocator. It was a bit underwater though. I don't know how I would get rid of that around the translocator, but a translocator it was. So I started decluttering and making it safe. There wasn't much in here to get excited about, but anything is better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. I made a sensible access point because I was going to cover up the opening to the cave, but I didn't want to lose the translocator, and I was itching to find out exactly where it took me. That would be another pond I would need to cover though. So off we went for a little trip. But it took us to the middle of an ocean and into a cave, which I wasn't really interested in exploring. But I tidied it up like the other one, like you do. Took all the aged wood, because that would come in useful. And tried to find out how much further north that we had gone. It wasn't really that far from the last translocator that I opened, or that shopping mall that I'd found. So I just marked it and got back to my planning. The next building that I planned out was the first keep. This is described as a squat and round drum tower, and around it lies a lich yard. Now, a lich yard is a type of graveyard where the servants of the old kings of winter were buried. There are also descriptions of gargoyles being on top of the first keep. Well, the build site was getting fairly busy. Even though there was one bear in that bear pit, it didn't stop 2 more bears spawning. Very close to the first keep was the broken tower, and that's what I planned out next. It was also known as the burnt tower, and it was once the tallest tower in Winterfell, before it got struck by lightning and lost its top third. This was the tower that Bran was pushed from by one of the Lannisters because of what he witnessed there. The next building I planned out were known as the Glass Gardens. This was a very large greenhouse heated by the hot springs, and it was used to grow fruits and vegetables and flowers. The description also mentioned green and yellow glass panes locked in frames. And I have been collecting materials to make terra preta so that the growth rate in this greenhouse would be at its fastest rate. I'm not quite sure how I'll lay the dirt though at this point. I carried on planning out the walls on the south side of the castle. I wanted to be able to put in the stables and the kennels, which to me seemed logical to put them on this side of the castle, because further to the west of this area would be the Hunter's Gate, which was on the west side of the castle, and hunting parties would go out through that gate so they didn't have to go out through the main gate. I was just putting a representation of the stables and kennels here because I didn't really know what size I wanted, and were very much subject to change. I hadn't even thought how I wanted them to look or how big they were going to be, so yeah, as long as I got them in there, I wouldn't forget about them. Back on the north side of the castle was another round building, and this was the bell tower. And this was another tower that had succumbed to a lightning strike, but it was attached to another tower fairly close to it by another covered bridge, and this was the rookery. And below the rookery, in the same tower, was the maester's turret. And maesters in Game of Thrones were learned men. They were scholars, healers and advisors. The bell tower and the rookery were the most westerly buildings, and I planned a wall to join the north wall to the south wall, because beyond would be the Godswood, and I'll talk to you about the Godswood in a minute. The last building I planned out was the library tower, and this actually housed the library, as you would imagine. It had a variety of texts in it, some of them collected over centuries by House Stark. It also was described as having a spiral staircase on the outside. I had planned out more diagonal walls on this side. Whether they stayed diagonal or whether I changed them for straight ones would depend on how difficult I found building diagonal walls, so we'd have to see about that. Next, I planned out the Godswood. Now, the Godswood was an ancient wood. It was said to have been untouched for 10,000 years. And at its centre was a carved weirwood tree. The Godswood was a sacred space for followers of the old gods. It was a place for worship and reflection, and there was quite a lot of description about it in the books. There were also buildings beneath Winterfell. There was an extensive crypt that held the sepulchres of the Starks of Winterfell. There were also undercrofts and cellars, mostly used for storage. And in the open spaces around the buildings, I would put smaller buildings for the small folk to live in who worked within Winterfell. So as you can imagine, Winterfell was quite a large, full, busy castle, and it'd be quite a challenge to make it look like I want it to. But we're going to have a go, and I'm going to start with the Great Hall. So in the next episode, I'll show you how I got on with that. So that's it for this episode. So take care, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.